Welcome everybody to our webinar. So it's designed for professional services firms. So all those people out there that have got those sort of budding questions, please get those ready. So for those who don't already know me, I'm Anna Jarrold and I'm a tax partner focused on advising professional services firms. So if we've not met before, hello. So BDO is the world's 5th largest accounting firm. And actually, it's always a surprise that people don't know some of the stats that we are showing on the screen. So we're in over 160 countries, got over 100,000 people in our 1,800 offices. It's absolutely huge. And we've been long-standing advisors to the sector, and our national professional services team is also one of the largest dedicated to the sector within a UK accountancy firm. And that means that we've got an awful lot of expertise. So through our strong sector focus, we work with a full range of clients, whether they be boutique firms through to the largest international businesses, and cover all sorts of structures, be them partnerships, privately owned businesses, listed, private equity backed businesses, and others. So our speakers today are Ian Bowden, a partner, and we've also got Jason Land, one of our principals, and both of those advise on the use of technology in tax. So we're very, very grateful for our speakers to join us today, a very hot topic. And so during this session, Ian and Jason are going to explore the use of technology in professional services firms for handling tax matters. So putting into the context of technology in the business. So how do we actually use it in the context of the operating world that we have to live in? Answering sort of questions around where do you start with it? How do you bring it to life in the business itself when you're trying to do BAU all the time as well? And very specifically using some case studies to sort of show how it really works in the real world. So for those who are joining us like on other sessions that we've had, we're running this live. So if you do have questions, I do encourage you to ask them. There's a Q&A function, so pop them in there as we go, as they come up in your mind, and then we'll collect them and answer as many as we can at the end of the session. And if time doesn't permit, then we'll pick up with you separately. So we're going to finish within the hour, and we will share the recording and the slides within a few days. So to go into a little bit more detail about who you are, I'm going to hand over to you, Ian, and you can take it from here. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. And firstly, thank you very much, Anna, for inviting us along. Really do appreciate the time and welcome, everybody. I hope you find this session very useful. As Anna kind of alluded to, we're going to have a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of the tax technology market, what people are doing and trying to bring that to life. And why am I sitting here in front of you talking about this topic today? So I've been doing this a little while. So I've been involved in tax technology for about the past 30 years, doing large-scale tax transformations for about the last 25 years. And this has been my day job. We focus quite heavily on this sector because we've got a little bit of inside knowledge, shall we say, from our own experiences of living in-house as well. And hopefully we'll be able to share some insights with you today. So, Jason, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Jason Land, and I say I'm a principal with Ian. I've been working with Ian in the tax technology space for about 14 years. I was a generalist before then. And my focus is around governance, controls and process, and then how technology supports the delivery of tax, because it sort of sits alongside those. It's sort of integrated with it. And you can't really separate the two. That process needs to be supported by good, strong automation and technology. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Jason. Let's get cracking. And as Anna said, please do ask questions as we go along. More than happy to answer them as we go. So, Jade, can we just flip onto the first page? I'm obviously very old, and when I first started doing tax technology, one of the things that organizations used to do was it was all about point solutions. So I'd get a lot of conversations from groups saying, oh, Ian, what's the best VAT product for me? What's the best personal tax product? What's the best corporate tax product? And we would help. We'd have a look at the market. We'd help them find the right one. But it wasn't very holistic. It wasn't very joined up. And what we've seen in the market is a bit of a trend over the last 4 or 5 years, where organizations are perhaps trying to take advantage of what's going on across their firm, perhaps looking at how broader finance transformation system changes are happening and could be relevant for tax, and we could potentially take advantage of this. So we start this session today with what we call a kind of holistic approach. And what's been fabulous in the market is that organizations are starting to have a look at what is the right operating model for you. So within your tax functions, within your professional services firms, what's the right model? And no doubt a number of you over the years have looked at outsourcing options, and then it works in cycles, and then you bring it back in-house, and then you outsource it again. And then there's elements of new models coming in around more co-sourcing, where you do a bit and we do a bit. And those models are on offer to clients as well. And it's never been more important to kind of think about, and Jason will talk about a little bit about the pressures that we're seeing in the professional services world at the moment. But it's never been more important to have a little bit of a think about your operating models and think about, well, which are the steps, which are the actions that you can do yourselves internally? Where's the best place for this work to be done? Is there some new clever outsourcing models? Is there temporary outsourcing? Is there transformation as part of it that can help? And it's been great watching the market evolve and wrestle with some of the challenges around what that operating model should look like, and to try and help you be more informed when it comes to deciding what you need and what you want. Organizations have looked at things in 3 big buckets, and we've got them as cogs here on our diagram on the right-hand side. The starting point and the place we always encourage organizations to think about is those existing systems. So within your organizations, a number of you will have spent money on a new accounting system. A lot of the law firms will have upgraded to a new version of your elite software or others. Some of you in the larger practices will have seen the new SAP practice software, the Oracle practice software, all coming in. Brand new systems or upgrades to your existing systems. And there's an opportunity for you to optimize some of those for the tax and the finance function. And that's a great starting point, because your IT teams don't need to spend any additional money, and you're doing something, it's a bit of a horrible term, but sweating the asset is the technical term that they use in this area, and finding how tax can work in that. And that means that you might not need to outsource, or you might be able to do more internally. The other big change that we talked about is third-party solutions. At BDO, we're completely platform agnostic, and we're able to kind of give you some insights into what technology solutions are out there. But instead of just buying one solution that does a VAT return or a corporate tax return or a personal tax return, people are looking at how that works together in an interactive way. So to give an example, if we think about the fact that MTD for corporate tax is coming soon, we've seen MTD for VAT already land. But what MTD for CT is going to do is your tax provisions, your corporate tax returns, and your statutory financial statements all become bundled together as one. The data has to be moved seamlessly between them. Human hands can't touch them, and we have to do a lot more. So that if there is systems that can do all 3, because in that example, the data is the same, it's just a different set of adjustments. So why should I be buying different systems with different login IDs, different passwords, that I have to get data out and bring it in? What can we do holistically? And that technology market has really risen to the challenge. And we'll hear a little bit more about some of the new areas around Pillar 2 shortly from Jason. But the technology vendors have responded. Their prices have come down, their licenses have come down, and their technology can do more. So it's a great opportunity to explore whether there are some vendors that can potentially plug gaps as part and parcel of what we do. And then the last cog, and we've got it as a cog, but perhaps it should be some duct tape. It's called targeted automation, small automation. This is where can we, glue 2 bits of spreadsheets together to get us a better result? Where can we use some of the new buzzwords, this AI, this robotic process automation, to simplify and streamline some of the things that we do? Doesn't have to be perfect, but can it make a big difference? And with the world where we've got huge volumes of data now, data we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in this session, the targeted automation is a way of trying to filter and produce information in a format that our brains can handle. For a number of you, your organizations will be dealing with hundreds and thousands of rows of information, and you're plowing through those line by line. There is better ways, and that duct tape box is the cheap and cheerful ways of getting you moving before you start looking holistically at the other two. So I just wanted to set some context before we jump into today, and we'll make it very specific to the professional services world. But I just wanted to set some context into what we're seeing generally. And it's all around figuring out your operating models and then understanding, wow, I didn't realize that some of this technology could do so much for me before I need to do something else. So Jay, do you mind just popping on the next slide for me? And if we turn the magnifying glass back to the professional services world, it's fascinating at the moment in your world, particularly if I take an example of a law firm. A number of you will have seen that there's law firms in the US that are springing up that are using machines and technology to provide me with some legal advice. I can log onto a website, put in my particular case. The machine, the algorithm runs through all of the case law, all of the history, and it finds my result, and it produces a lovely report, and it tells me what I should be doing and the appropriate actions. For a lot of law firms, they're making quite a bit of money, and it's disruptive. And you know, there's a quote that's always attributed to Bill Gates, but people overestimate what technology can do for them in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 3 years. And when we think about that in this type of context, the changing face for law firms and the disruptive nature of some of that technology, we're starting to see ripples of that come through. It's perhaps not impacting your businesses significantly at this time. It's a bit of a quirk. It's a bit of a joke. It's a bit of fun. But what is that going to mean in the longer term? What will that mean for your type of businesses? And what we've seen in the conversations that we're having with professional services firms at the moment is some of that disruptive technology that we're seeing at the external side of our business, can we use some of that internally to improve what we're doing? We'll talk about some of the pressures that professional services firms are under in a moment, but you know, are you being asked as a back office tax and finance function to why aren't you adopting the technology that your client-facing colleagues are doing? There'll be areas of your groups and your functions where you're seeing you're seeing finance technology people and systems people that are introducing algorithms and better reports, management information, and everything else. You may have access to people with some of the duct tape solutions we talked about on slide 1 being inside your firm now. And part and parcel of system changes and upgrades, it's making things quite tough for professional services worlds because, you know, and if you're anything like us as an organization, the shiny side of the firm projects a face of how together and how important this stuff is. We've got to be adopting technology or we're falling miles behind. That's what we're seeing. We can't get away from it. But how many of you are still using spreadsheets? How many of you are still using a spreadsheet that was written by a guy called Dave who left the firm 5 years ago and took the password with him? How many of you are going through year ends and trying to remember where those files were that you put last year with some of the adjustments and everything?
Obviously, none of that applies here.
Yeah, we've never done that. We've never seen that either. I'm sure it never happens in practice, but it's not easy for you guys in the professional services firms at the moment, particularly with the shiny front ends that your firms are facing. And you know, your organizations are worried about this market disruption. But let's talk about some of the other external factors. Jay, do you want to flip onto the next page?
Right, okay, thanks. So in the same way that businesses don't stand still, legislation and the economic environment is always evolving. Ian's talked about the changing market. And there's a real driver to change the way that you manage your tax obligations. And that driver is driven by the internal side, but increasingly by the external market, because there is just a continuous move towards more complexity in tax technical areas and your global tax requirements. So Pillar 2, we've mentioned a couple of times, that's one of the key areas where, you know, those larger multinational enterprises need to access up to 400 points of data, and getting that data is kind of key. We're also seeing complications around people. There are head count constraints and people moving cross-border much more regularly now. You know, generally, professional services firms are people businesses. And coming out of COVID, people are moving much more than they were for the last couple of years. There's a need and an expectation of more speed and accuracy in terms of the delivery side of things, and demand for greater transparency and being accountable for your tax profile. And then there's those economic pressures, you know, that are squeezing margins and limiting available budgets. You know, I've been talking to a number of firms that are kind of, well, we want to do this year, but actually the budget's just not there. So we're pushing out our timetable for that. So there are lots of external pressures that are driving people to think, how do I go about managing these things more effectively? How do I make sure that I can keep the lights on, I can still be compliant, and actually I'm moving the dial? The speed of change in all of these areas is just increasing, but the benefit to all this is that the speed of development of technology and technology tools to support this is also increasing. Now that's got a knock-on effect, because with the available technologies developing at the speed that they are, and HMRC and tax authorities generally seeing people applying these technologies to their front of house practices, as Ian said, the robot lawyer piece, there's an expectation from tax authorities generally that your data is going to be better, that you'll be applying these processes, you'll be applying these technologies, you'll have underlying robust processes. And so the demand for more data and more self-assurance and self-accountability sort of increases, and it drives an expectation that your tax filings will be better, will be efficient. We can load HMRC and the tax authorities think they can load additional obligations on businesses and they'll just deal with it. I think that is a real key issue for businesses. And having better controls and structured data over all of that is really a gateway to better delivery. You know, what are tax functions doing? What are tax functions in the professional services firms? What are tax functions more generally doing about that? Well, I think Ian's talked about those front of house pieces. They're looking at what they have in place, where they're comfortable that they can be compliant, and where they are struggling because, you know, they might not have had that software update. They might not have been able to roll out that new ERP system. And they're saying, well, what can we do? How can we be compliant? And really the starting point for that when clients come and talk to us about that is, okay, so what's your approach here? What's your strategic approach? What's your direction of travel? What does your current state look like? And what can you do now? And what can you do in the medium term to turn the dial on what you do? We often approach it by running something we call a technology lab, a tax tech lab, if you like, where we look at that current state, we understand what those issues are, we capture those, we talk about the art of the possible, we look at what the broader technology strategy is for that business, and we help them to sort of draw a map, if you like, a roadmap to improving and enhancing. You know, knowing the market and knowing what the available systems and tools do is kind of key to be able to make the right decisions so that every investment that you do in technology moves in the right way. By doing that and thinking about it holistically, thinking about actually what practically will work for you, we can rank the various services, the various technologies against what you might have in-house, or what is available for a small incremental budget, or ways you can adapt things to sweat that asset more effectively and help you drive that business case, develop that business case.
I think that business case is really interesting. I think we've called the slide, how can it help? And I think the point to just close on this slide is the fact that regulation changes and new taxes and workforce leaving and workforce moving is offering an opportunity to write a business case to invest in technology or explore technology or to change operating models in that space. So, you know, it's a when a new tax comes along, when an MTD for CT comes along, or a Pillar 2 comes along, or a basis period reform comes along, there's changes that need to be made as part and parcel of your tax function. And we're seeing a lot of organisations taking advantage of a change, a mandatory regulatory change that then gives you the right to ask for budget, and then being clever in terms of that budget assignment, in terms of how do you spend it, where do you do it, and what do you do is very much part and parcel of your overall strategy. But everybody's having to put together a business case at the moment to justify investments, and it's hard because everyone is being squeezed. But being able to, as Jason alluded to, being able to baseline what you do at the moment, what it costs, and how are you going to deliver these new requirements, these additional changes with less people, is very, very difficult. And technology is a great option, but using the regulatory changes to help enhance your business case. But it's probably worth talking about the couple of the big drivers for transformation as well. JT, can you just pop onto the next slide for us? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ian. So the three big drivers, these are kind of the key things that we're seeing with businesses at the moment. And the first one, and they're not ranked in any particular order here, but the first one we've got on the left is that ESG piece, environment, social governance piece. You know, we're seeing a real focus on sustainability, about walking the walk, talking the talk. You know, at the bottom here, we've got GRI 207, B Team and Taxmark. There are lots and lots of initiatives around the ESG agenda, and environmental taxes coming along as well. And businesses are really trying to be on the front foot and talk about what they're doing. Now, what does that mean in practice? Well, the environmental taxes need to be dealt with. But a lot of businesses are saying, okay, so if I look at what others are doing in this area, it's pretty much a tax strategy. It's talking about risk and governance, but it's about getting access to data, being able to talk the talk in terms of, well, these are our aspirations. This is kind of our approach to the environmental and social elements. But actually, what are we doing? Where are we paying taxes? Are we paying in the areas that we're doing business? What's our approach? And actually articulating those elements. You don't automatically jump to a technology piece, right? But it's everything to do with tax is underpinned by data, and getting data for these particular areas is absolutely key. The second area we've got on here, and which will apply to some but not all of you, is around Pillar 2. So those that it applies to, I'm sure you're aware who you are, those multinational enterprises with greater than 750 million euro turnover. That requires more than 400 data points to be collated. Everybody who exceeds that limit needs to be thinking about these elements. This is a piece of technology that, I mean, Ian mentioned 5 years ago. It's probably a good time span. 5 years ago, most of those businesses would have struggled to access that data. They're still struggling, but actually it's a possibility now, and it's possible for them to do that reporting. And working with clients to drive the technical analysis is one thing, but then actually how do you be compliant? How do you produce those returns and submit them when that time comes? You know, doing those particular elements. There are around 13 different types of technology that have hit the market since Pillar 2 became a thing. And actually understanding the benefits or the upsides and downsides of each of those individual elements, and sitting them against, well, what are we already doing for CBCR, and drawing that together is key.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think what we would have seen a few years ago is if a new requirement came out, every organisation would build a spreadsheet. And I'm sure a number of you have already had a go at, for those that are in scope, have had a go at building a spreadsheet in this area. This is probably the first time that I would actively discourage you from building a spreadsheet. The complexity associated with this one, the nuances associated with every country taking a slightly different approach. Yes, if you were doing your safe harbour analysis and then looking at what your disclosure statements needed to look like, yeah, that's something that people can consider. But there's very few organisations that want to own and manage that calculation, particularly if it was written by Dave and he leaves a couple of weeks later with his password for that one. That's not a pleasant thing to update. That's the most brutal one that I've seen come in. And I know it's not applicable to all of you, but there's there's a direction of travel that if a 750 million euro business, what's the chances that they'll drop that down to 500 or 400? Where could that go? That could impact all multinationals that have got any kind of overseas activity. On the last one, Jay.
Thanks. So professional services firms, the bit that is very pertinent to you guys, so all of you, I guess, that squeeze on margins is kind of thing. I think professional services firms have all of the usual issues that other businesses have around VAT reporting, VAT determination, PAYE settlement agreement calculations. One of my case studies is on that in particular. But there's also that overlay of the profit calculation that's different to corporates, right? And actually different firms have got different ways of calculating that, and some are relatively straightforward, but many are complicated and require rework when new results are delivered. Having something or putting together an approach that draws data from core underlying systems and take it right the way through to tax return ready information is a real win for businesses like that, for like you guys. And I think thinking about that small automation piece, that sticking plaster piece, actually used in the right way, can drive some real benefits around that. And also more broadly, in terms of bringing it all together, thinking about basis period reform, those transitional measures that are going to hit you all, and not just for next year, but actually the next few years, as those with sort of that 30th of April year ends sort of try and cope and deal with that. And then global footprint, you know, every law firm potentially has some level of globalization, and moving people around and dealing with those elements is kind of key. There's lots. When you have a professional services firm, it's like a standard business, but with added complexity is the way that I think about it. And there's a real drive, I think, to think about how you go about managing that.
And I think what that also means is that the regulators in different countries, because you're not just a normal business, you've got a couple of quirks in there. They are looking at you because some of the extra things that you need to do there's a volume of transaction data associated with them, and that's happy hunting ground for revenue authorities now. We saw last year for the first time HMRC take advantage of some of the IXBRL data that you've been sending for the last 12 years. A number of you will be surprised to see that HMRC looked at that for the first time last year. But if you're having to provide more information in terms of profit allocation, all of this basis period reform stuff, there's more data for HMRC to go after, there's more data for revenue authorities to go after, and there's a greater chance that there's errors in there. So it isn't easy for you guys at the moment.
Next slide, please. So we did a survey last year as a sort of a broader tax function, tax automation survey. And one of the questions in it was, what's the biggest challenge for the tax department? And we were pretty surprised, actually, that when it came back, that of the levels listed, the different items listed, training tax teams on technology tools and processes was well, so high, the highest percentage response. And I think this is a real sign that death by Excel is not the way that businesses are now thinking about operating. You know, there's a real shift. I think tax teams are becoming younger, and they don't want to spend their lives analysing everything in Excel, as Ian mentioned in one of the previous slides.
It's funny, when I first started doing this, the amount of heads of tax that would, you know, ask the question, Ian, can I get to retirement without having to engage on this? And a few of them did. And there's a fair few younger tax functions, as Jason said, out there now as a result. And we can't get away from it. We have to embrace it and try and take advantage of it as part and parcel. And I think, you know, people don't want to learn the same way we did. You know, I got shipped off to a compliance centre for 6 months to do comps. And, you know, people don't learn the same way, and people want more out of their jobs. They don't expect to have to plow through data in the volumes that we did. I want to be able to use technology and tools because that's what my phone does, and that's what I expect to see an algorithm summarizing that information, and I'll just provide the expert overview. So it's, it is a different world we're working in, and we're losing good people, and we're not keeping good people because they don't want to work the same way as we did. But we
were still using abacuses when I started to do tax, so there you go. I think the piece is understanding what's available and understanding what's already used within your firms is kind of key, and understanding how difficult and how training and understanding what is available can be a real eye opener. I was talking to a client only last week, and because their version of SAP wouldn't apply a particular tax treatment, they could issue manual invoices without a tax code available. The world had ended, and they'd accepted that they couldn't be compliant, that they'd need to do some offline check every month. Well, no, there's an automation solution that's available that can enhance that. Not knowing about these things is kind of the biggest issue, because once you know that there's a potential solution for these things that can be done in a pretty light touch manner, then actually that's a game changer. And once you've embraced that once, it's kind of it opens your eyes to the possibilities. So I think understanding the tools, understanding those technologies is such a big thing for businesses now. Next slide, please, Jay. And then finally, on our survey says section, another question that was raised was, what specific areas of tax technology or tax automation are you planning to invest in? The biggest takeaway from me from this slide was that 3% on the right hand side. None. 3%, which means that 97% of people were going to invest more in technology in 2024, which I think is a massive thing, right? And actually, if you look at the first two here, so it's pretty evenly split. You'd say, well, everybody's investing in everything. Actually, if you look at data analytics, business intelligence, and tax automation, kind of the same thing. They're kind of driving towards taking data and understanding it better. And I think that is really the key takeaway for me from this slide, that 97% of people were investing in this stuff. And actually, most of it is around understanding and better managing data, moving away from that death by Excel. Excel will have its place, right? I mean, at this particular point, we can't say what will happen in the future, but at this particular point, we can say that Excel will always have its place in the right situation, but it's not always the answer. Next slide.
I think
Back to you.
It is just before we jump into the case studies and wrap this up for today, I thought it was worth having a bit of a recap in terms of some of this stuff can be quite daunting. Some of this stuff isn't your day job, and you're not expected to keep your companies going, do all the tax, with poor data at the end of the process, keep up to date with legislation, and also know what on earth is robotic process automation and how can robots help you and do those types of things. And it can be quite scary and it can be quite daunting. But what we've tried to break down how we kind of like to see groups think about this, and there's always the opportunity to come and have a word to us, come and have a chat to us if there's anything you want to kind of do. Unfortunately, this has been my day job for nearly 30 years, and I'm still excited about the subject, which is quite surprising when you say it out loud. But the starting point for me, and this doesn't have to be a big scary document, needs to be a little bit of a tax technology strategy. We shouldn't be writing these documents that with more than 3 years in the future, because we just don't know what's going to happen by that point. We need to be realistic. We need to be practical. Whatever you do in terms of that strategy, it has to be aligned with what the business is doing, and it has to give you an improvement around your operating model. So even if it's just a scribble on the back of an envelope that you kind of like the idea of, it's worth just having a little think about that strategy in terms of where you want to take your operating model. Don't think about it too far. And then hopefully what pops out, whether that's a vision or a roadmap or something you write down, or just clarity in your head, what does that journey look like? And we've touched a little bit on people. People will want to move. Jason's was at his previous organization for like 70 years, I think it was. And, that doesn't happen as much anymore. People are wanting to move around for interesting and more challenging work. When we build these roadmaps and the visions, back to that Bill Gates quote of we overestimate the impact on first year, how do we turn some of that around? And what I really like to see in the vision is front loading your plan with some areas that you can make some money on quickly to prove that you can do this and prove that it's the right thing to do. And then it gives you the right to continue. So there's a couple of areas on there, be it something like PSA returns, global mobility, capital allowance. It doesn't really matter which it is. If it could be VAT reclaim. If there's something in your organization where you're thinking, if I got a bit better data here, I could get I could get some money back for the organization. It could be PSA returns. PSA returns is an obvious one where groups just go, it's too hard to get the necessary data. I'm just going to take a very conservative approach. But if you had access to slightly better data, you had a quick look at that, would you turn around and go, actually, I've proved that I can get some return on that investment. My R&D is playing bigger and better. So have that roadmap, think about front loading it, think about whether you can use some of your internal teams. A number of you will have clever IT people that are doing things on the front end. Can they be repurposed? There's a huge push in these duct tape solutions to do it yourself more, and being able to take something that's pretty standard, a Microsoft Power BI and Alteryx, something cheap and cheerful, and being able to solve 2 or 3 problems with that same bit of tech. So take advantage of internal technologies that you're already using, take advantage of your internal team. The key to all of this is data, though. Focus on your data. If you invest in technology and you haven't looked at your data and process, you're just wasting money and you're wasting time. Please have a look at whether you're tagging it in the right way. Anybody that's going through system transformations at the moment, how can you add additional validation into there to reduce the errors? Use some of the analytics to tell you where the gaps are or the errors are in your data and fix it at source. Fix it with your suppliers, fix it with what's going out. And that is the game changer. That is the focus. Buying pretty technology because it's got a really nice map of the world. And if you're doing global mobility, it shows people flying around, is great. It's pretty, but if the data's rubbish, the planes are going to be crashing. So let's make sure we focus on that area. And the last point for this, before we jump into the case studies, was market standard software. For the first few years, people would buy a piece of technology off the shelf and adapt the hell out of it to make it work for you. Please don't do that. Please take advantage of other people's innovations. What we're seeing at the moment is people who've put systems in 6-7 years ago, who configured them to their process at the time. Their process changes, their world changes, their data changes. You're stuck with something that you can't upgrade, that nobody will touch. So please think about whether there's a possibility to take off-the-shelf stuff. It might only be 80% of your process, but use that as an opportunity to question, is your process right? Could you tweak your process to be more standard? Could you tweak your data to be more standard? And if you then still have nuances, look at things that can add on to the side. And that means that when a technology vendor upgrades or innovates, you can take advantage of their innovation. You're not stuck in a corner. And let's just pick up a couple of quick case studies, the last 2 minutes, just to bring that to life.
Just on that data piece. So Ian talked about if you're implementing a new system, people are going through software upgrades at the moment. There are a number of businesses out there that just put their head in their hands and say, well, my data's rubbish. I can't do anything. I'm just stuck because the data I get, I asked finance team for this particular report. I asked them for that particular report. I have to spend hours analysing it in Excel to make it work for this or for that purpose. They're doing that each and every time. But actually, if there's the best situation is being able to correct that data and put it right, as Ian rightly says. However, that sticking plaster, that automation piece, that small offline automation piece, can get you through that difficult period. If there isn't going to be an investment in a wholesale investment in the next 2-3 years, etc., it can help you to be compliant. It can free up your time because essentially, when you're running through that analysis, that death by Excel analysis to get that data to a point that you're happy with it, that's essentially running a set of rules in your head, right? That's a rules engine. People call that AI now, and that is something that can be put in place through those small automation elements. Sorry.
All right, thanks. Jade, can we onto the case study? So a couple of quick case studies to try and bring this to life, and then we'll wrap for any questions. I don't know whether I know we're getting any questions through or whether everybody's turned off at this point, but if you have got any questions for us or Anna, please do start filing in, and we've got a couple of slides left just to wrap this up for us. This example was a very interesting one, and it was a professional services firm. There was a new head of tax came in to the process, and there'd been some wholesale people changes, is probably the fairest way to put it. There'd been some adjustments in terms of the strategy and their focus. And so a new team came in who was very experienced, but relatively inexperienced in terms of the organization itself. And it gave them an opportunity to come at this with a fresh look, a clean consideration to what their challenges were. And they used it as an opportunity to secure some additional budget in terms of how they wanted to go about doing these types of things. They highlighted themselves that a couple of processes that they were involved with were broken, and for them it was their year-end process. They weren't sure how they were going to get through their year-end process at all, and they approached us for a conversation about whether they could outsource that to us on a temporary basis. And of course we had that conversation. What Jason mentioned at the beginning, we run these things called a tech lab, and it's back to the point of you don't know what you don't know. And these tech labs give you an opportunity to say, look, if you want to outsource, of course, that's a great option for you. But for something like the provision, is it worth considering what you can do internally? So the tech lab, we showed them we went through their processes as they understood it. We showed them 3 third-party products that were out there on the market that could potentially solve their problem for them. What popped out was a business case for them. And they selected a vendor as part and parcel of that could do the provision and the Pillar 2. They implemented the first phase of that provision and the first phase of that Pillar 2 pre-Christmas, so they could do their disclosure statements. And then we're going to have a fresh look in probably about a month's time, hopefully, when they come up for air, in terms of finalising the full provision, doing interim reporting as part and parcel of that. But how can they then get themselves ready for the Pillar 2 calculations? And that's due to start in April. But this was brought on by a change in personnel and a chance to look again and look fresh, and realising how on earth am I going to get through a year end with what I've got at the moment, because it's not what I built and I'm not comfortable looking at it from that perspective. Jason?
Next slide, please. Case study 2. So this is a PAYE settlement agreement case study. So we worked with this particular business. They were pulling their hair out because they had a system. I've stolen all my thunder with my little sort of jump in on Ian's last slide. So they ran analysed in 56,000 lines of data in their general ledger to look at their expenses and their PAYE settlement agreement type expenditure. They hadn't fixed it in their expenses system. They were doing all sorts of offline elements. So they were spending weeks, potentially months, looking at their underlying data, analysing it, and coming up with an accurate number for their PSA. We sat down with them. They were really strong in terms of their underlying governance and approach to this, but they were just struggling with the underlying data issues. They had a really good relationship with their CCM. We sat down with them and did sort of that tech lab thing that Ian mentioned. We walked through their current state, what process they were going through, essentially that mindset of what would I do in Excel to analyse all of these account codes? How would I manage that? How would I clean this data up? How do I allocate that to the various buckets, etc.? And then we did a little case study, and we looked at what they had internally and what else we could use. And we put 3 different tools up on the screen: Alteryx, Power Automate, and UiPath. And we'll walk through the benefits of each and how each would operate, because a lot of this is around usability, right? It's about what functions people would be comfortable using, because at the end of the day, we walk away and you as a business need to operate this in your own environment. They selected Alteryx in this particular example. So what you're seeing in front of you is essentially what's referred to as an Alteryx flow. It's essentially a process, and you build this within Alteryx by a drag and drop type approach, where each of these individual little icons that you can see runs a particular process. So you can create something that runs that set of rules in your head that you would do when you're analysing a piece of data. But on the plus side, for tools like this, it will always process it to exactly the same standard, right? It's not going to have an argument with its other half. It's not going to have a hangover one particular morning. It's going to process that right first time every analysis. And what will pop out at the end will be the outputs from that analysis, and any exceptions that you then need to look at. So it can turn a process that lasts months into a process that lasts seconds in order to run. What is really important around all of this, because we talk about this and it sounds fantastic, you know, you put a spreadsheet in and you come out with the answer at the end. What is really important, and actually a head of tax session that I was talking to about Alteryx a few months ago said, is what's really important are the boxes around the icons, because otherwise it turns into that spreadsheet that Dave produced 5 years ago, right? And you don't know how it operates. You don't know what these icons are doing. So putting little labels that say, do this, do that. This is the section that cleans this up. This is the section that looks in this other system to blend two different sources of data together is kind of key. So what this did was this reduced the amount of time that they were required to do this spreadsheet analysis to essentially they can produce their PSA in a couple of hours. But more importantly, I mean, that was very important, but the real key for them was that they knew that it was accurate. He knew that they could not do a better job because they'd essentially poured their whole thought process into this process flow.
So, Anna, just conscious of time, we've got 12 minutes left. We've got one case study. Do we want to do that, or have we got some questions that we want to spend our last 10 minutes on the questions?
I think you might be able to answer some of the questions through your final case study. So why don't you do that, and then we can pick. Yeah, if you can briefly go through those points.
Okay, I'll make it quick. We've had final case study. Case study 3, please, Jay. So this was what you can see here is the tech lab on the left-hand side. That's the agenda for the tech lab. And what you can see next to it is the project charter. So this was a particular example with a client that was having issues around their VAT determination. They're getting those VAT codes applied and applying the correct VAT treatment. Now, this was a business that had grown through acquisition. So it had a number of legacy underlying systems, which means that you couldn't apply the same rules to each. So in order to produce that VAT return, it was kind of bad data in 4 systems rather than bad data in a system that you could just overlay, or good data in a couple of systems. And so what we did, we analysed the problem in the same way that we've talked about for the other examples. And their decision wasn't to fix it in system 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's 4 different underlying finance systems. We applied a piece over the top to say, let's take the data out, let's put it somewhere where it can be applied consistently to produce our outputs. That meant that they could be compliant, they could be comfortable with a light touch implementation of a VAT engine in the short term, but it also meant that they've got aspirations, this business, to move systems 1, 2, and 3 to a next-gen platform in the next couple of years. System 4 is pretty new, so they're just going to leave that sitting on the side. But that means that when they do that, they've just got to move the pointers in that system 1 to the VAT engine, and actually a lot of the configuration is already done for VAT. They haven't got to redo that. That makes their implementation of new system 1 to 3 much more efficient, and it means that they can be confident that they're going to be able to be compliant going forward. They're now, we've talked a little bit around pillar 2. They're now looking at pillar 2, and actually we've been talking to them about how they go about developing their approach to that and what systems are available and how that might look for them.
Great.
Well, that was us, Anna.
Yeah,
don't know if any questions that have come through.
Well, I think there's plenty of questions that we could start with. So let's go with a particular point around how you get started with all of this. So I think, through all my conversations and the team's conversations with professional services firms, as you said, there's always a lot to be handling. And particularly this year with, if you're in a partnership structure, basis period reform. So there's always that question of, look, even if I have the inclination to do all of this, how do I get started with a limited amount of capacity around my own team's availability to handle this, let alone the knowledge? So how do you practically work with people to kind of get started? And I think there is an acknowledgement that you can have this sort of incremental change over a few years can actually mean quite a lot of change over a period. But how do you get going on this stuff?
Yeah, we had a conversation with a law firm a few weeks ago, and they were pulling together their own thought process. Back to my slide in terms of the starting point, they'd started to pull together their own strategy because they were getting some pressure in terms of, as a business overall, what should we be doing?
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful starting point in terms of putting that together. Where we got to was that if they could do something with the duct tape solutions, that would show them and give them the right to go, because they didn't have the budget to go and buy something fancy. They didn't have the budget to do that. They were having to work out how the team could do more, and they weren't going to be given extra team members as part and parcel of the work that was there. So as you say, the basis period reform, the partner allocations and things like that were done on old-fashioned, well, certainly the partner allocations were done on old-fashioned spreadsheets. And so what they did was they looked at a very small project, a very small business case, where they'd take a small element of training from us, where they'd do, a day and a half of training with some of the data analytics products and data wrangling products that they use themselves in the organization in other areas. They were looking to bring somebody in from the finance team to join them for that workshop. And what we were going to do is take their example of what they do at the moment in one particular area and show them how something like an Alteryx or a Power BI or a Power Automate could be used to basically train the internal teams to then deliver something. And that training workshop would build them 80% solution in that session. And they could see how a standard bit of technology could be applied to a tax process. So giving the tax team a bit of confidence that they could try some of these things, then having access to our team just to validate the outputs that they'd produced. They didn't want us to build the stuff, but it's sometimes nice for somebody to check your homework, and being able to just give them a couple of pointers. And it was a very, very cost-effective way of doing it. They already had the technology. They bought, a day and a half from us in terms of training, and now they're looking at 2 or 3 processes that they can do themselves, and they've got a good understanding of at least one, how that's going to kind of work and pre-built. So starting small is a great option. But standing still and burying your head in the sand is no longer an option. You've got to do something, but proving that there's a business case there and proving you can save money.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got to have a bit of a will, and whether that's a burning platform because someone's pushing you to do it, or just recognizing that the world's changing. And then I guess what you're saying is that's a very specific solution for that particular client, but actually stepping back and having someone like you in the room can actually help with that. Like, well, what's the first step? So what you did with that particular client was to identify the first step is you've got some tools. Let's work out how you can use them effectively to just get you going. And others, and Jason, I know, we've had client discussions on this sort of thing about, well, what are your processes? So, if it depends on where you start on your journey with this, actually, you might actually need to understand more about how you go about things. Then you can think about, well, what technology solutions might I be able to apply something now? I don't know if you've got a particular view on that, Jason. Yeah,
I mean, overlaying technology to a bad process is never a good idea, right? Then you have a bad process enabled by technology. It's got to be about understanding what your current state is and validating that actually it's the right approach, and therefore you can enhance it by X or Y using technology tools. Sitting down with the client and working out what the problems are for them, and then validating with them their appetite, if you like, and availability to go the next step. and actually saying, well, how much do you have capacity to do, and how much do you need us to support you with those initial steps, I think is kind of key, because every client has got different pressures, right? They've got different demands on their time, and actually working out what would work best for them is a conversation that you can have with them, and we can support as much or as little, you know, just that training element, or actually produce the first two things that are the proof of concept, which means they get more budget or whatever it is, and actually start to free up some of that time so they've got more time to be able to focus on the bigger issues.
Yeah. So I was sort of helping them with that route map about where they start, what's important to them. And some of your survey results really show that there's actually quite equal responses across a different array of things. So actually everyone's got different drivers, whether that's the internal function saying, look, quality and risk, we want to make sure that when the next thematic review comes around from HMRC, that we've got our systems and processes in place to handle that. Or actually the data is really important because we need to sort of feed into something that the firm's thinking about, whether that's a structural change or whatever they've got going on in terms of priorities. So I think if people are going to take away sort of one particular aspect of this, which is work out what's your current situation with somebody who knows what they're talking about, because then you can apply the solutions, whether that's a holistic solution, a really huge thing that's going to come in, something that the firm's already doing, or something that the firm's already got, and apply that to the relevant points that are the top priorities. And so that feels like it's that sort of planning that's really key for people, and then they can get on that journey of kind of like solving and implementing the solutions to each of those aspects.
That's absolutely right. I mean, so I started to do this type of work with Ian about 14 years ago. Before then, it was all about the advice and about how you go about, all about doing the piece of work, right? And you sat essentially, even in a advisory firm, you sort of sat in your ivory tower and just expected a client to have good data and good access. And it was all about the technical analysis. And that's not the real world. You know, doing this sort of work makes you appreciate that every client has got different pressures, it's got different issues, and actually data can be a problem because it underpins every tax filing and every tax process that you need to do. So having an appreciation of that and building that roadmap, that strategy to what it needs to look like, and actually getting a view outside of your ivory tower, you're sort of, because you don't see what's going on when you're in a professional services firm. You don't know what other professional services firms are doing. You don't know what advisory firms are doing. You don't know the art of the possible. And this sort of creates that visibility for you to say, okay, well, the best thing for me to do to be market standard or to be, to be able to deliver effectively is this and that, and building that roadmap is key.
Brilliant. Yeah, meeting people where they're at is absolutely fundamental, rather than just advising everyone to do the same thing completely. Right, so we're nearly at the top of the hour. So Ian, Jason, thank you so much for your insights. There's clearly this sort of expertise of really understanding how to approach something is key. So thank you, really appreciate that. As I said earlier, we will be circulating the slides and the recording of this within the next few days. If people do have questions, then please do send them to one of us. Anyone that you know within the team will be able to talk with Ian and Jason if you don't remember their contact details from this slide. But thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.